You're listening to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock.
Big John McCarthy has witnessed the best that the UFC had to offer.
That is it! Game, set, match! We have a new champion!
Your backstage pass to the world of mixed martial arts and combat sports. Only on the Ignotainment Media Network.
Let's get it on!
Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and me, Sean Wheelock. Every week on this podcast, John and I give you an inside look at MMA and combat sports, always separating fact from fiction. On this week's program, we'll discuss the California State Athletic Commission's Media Day, in which MMA journalists were allowed to serve as shadow judges at last Friday's Bellator event. Marc Raimondi, the outstanding writer for MMAfighting.com, will join us to describe his night cage side and what it was like to be trained by John McCarthy. Also on this week's program, we'll review arguably the oddest interaction between a fighter and a referee in MMA this year. Plus, John and I will pay tribute to Kevin Rozier, one of the original 10 UFC fighters who passed away on Tuesday at age 53. And as we do on every episode of Let's Get It On, John will answer your questions. Fire away via email, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Again, that's info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Remember that you can download and subscribe to our podcast on the iTunes Store. For Android, download the Stitcher app and subscribe. And you can go straight to our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. So last Friday, the California State Athletic Commission held its first ever media day, in which MMA journalists were invited to first undergo judging training taught by you, John, and then sit cage side and serve as a shadow judge. That's an outstanding progressive idea, John. All credit to Andy Foster, who heads the CSAC.
It was a great idea. You know, the whole point is that everyone gets this idea that, athletic commissions are trying to hide things and, they're secretive. There's no truth to that, and we want everyone to know exactly what goes on, why we do things a certain way, what is expected of the officials, what's expected of the inspectors, what they're doing when they're doing the drug test, how it actually goes. When you hear a fighter say, they screwed up, the sample or thing, people can say a lot of things, but the truth is, if you know the way that it's done, you go, that's just not true. There's too many elements that they will end up absolutely negating the test for, instead of trying to push things, they'll take and cancel it off of any little thing. So everything is about hopefully getting people to understand exactly how the commission works, why they do things the way they're doing it, and it's a great idea to get the media out there, because we have so many people having controversial thoughts about judging and what people are doing. We wanted to get them out there and let them see what it was really like sitting in those seats.
John, I know you're very close to Andy Foster, the head of the California State Athletic Commission. You told me a couple of weeks ago that this was going to be occurring at Bellator 136. Where did the idea come from? Was it from John? Was it from you, John? Was it from Andy? Was it from an outside source?
You know what? I will take credit for it. I was the one that brought it up.
I knew it. You
need to do it.
Good job.
The whole reason was, I look at, I'm part of, the sport in a way, and I read all the different websites and stuff, and when I keep on seeing the same thing coming up and going, they don't know what they're talking about. Well, part of the reason they don't know is because we don't help them. We don't show them what we do and why, and we don't sit there and make it to where, hey, this isn't like you're thinking that this person doesn't care. These people care, and it's important to them. And it's not like they're, they're doing this because they make a ton of money. This is because they have a passion for it. And no matter who you are, when you got people, saying how terrible you are and that you're stupid and your mother stinks and all this stuff, it gets to you. And so we wanted people to, absolutely have a say with what, is being put out there. Let them see what it's like to actually sit in that seat, to actually have to give 5 minutes of pure concentration on the fight, not be on their Twitter feed, not sit there and be writing, because that's their job. Actually just do it like a judge is going to do it and see what it's like.
John, in 2008, when I was transitioning from being a full-time soccer commentator to a full-time MMA commentator, I trained with the top professional soccer officials in the U.S. and Canada at their annual training camp. I did it for a BBC radio documentary. I'll tell you, it was an amazing experience. It made me a better commentator. As much respect as I had for the referees, the assistant referees, the fourth officials, I had more going out than I did coming in. But you hit on something, and it was the same thing I ran into. I pitched my idea to the U.S. Soccer Federation. People were for it and against it. And afterwards, everyone liked the documentary. I had a great experience. I was treated beautifully with tons of respect. But I was told the internal debate with U.S. Soccer Federation, well, maybe we shouldn't allow Sean. And someone who was acting as my advocate said, what exactly do we have to hide? And nobody had an answer. They said, you know what? We don't have anything to hide, so let's bring him in. Let's open it up.
That's the whole thing is, I actually got this from, being a police officer. Things would happen on, the department, and it drove me nuts that our department would have somebody that did something. What they did was absolutely right. And the media would get a hold of it, and they would put this whole spin on it that, oh, this is bad. And the only thing the department would say is, we're investigating, which only lets everybody out there think, oh, they're trying to cover something up, when that's not what's going on at all. But if you're not going to sit there and open up to these people and show them the facts and show them the things that took place in this situation or what's going on that we're trying to make things better, then they're never going to know. And so the only way you can do it is be transparent. If you have nothing to hide, what are you worried about?
We are now joined on Let's Get It On by one of the best writers in all of combat sports, our buddy Marc Raimondi of MMAfighting.com, who last Friday was one of 5 journalists to go all in on the California State Athletic Commission's Media Day. Hey, Marc. Well, you're out the other side. Tell us about your experience. I'm sure you view MMA much differently now than you did 1 week ago, right?
Well, I definitely view the entire judging process a whole lot differently. It was really an enlightening experience. I would have to rank the experience as one of probably in the top 5 of the coolest experiences I've had as a media member. It is not as easy as it looks. I think that there's a lot of misconceptions about judging out there, fans and media alike, and they think that, oh yeah, it's I can score around. It's no problem. It's not quite that easy. There's a lot more there are a lot more complexities to it than people think, and I think that when a regular a journalist he's on his couch, he's watching the fights from home, or even if he's watching it on press row, we're doing so many other things. We're tweeting, we're trying to live blog the event. You can't possibly judge a fight like that. I didn't realize how much stuff that you could possibly miss during a round when you're trying to do multiple things. It was really an eye-opening experience, and it was hard for me to kind of like zero in and concentrate for 5 minutes straight on just the fight and not think about, oh, I should tweet this, or oh, I should write about this. It was pretty cool. I'm glad I did it.
Marc, you're now a Big John protege. What was it like to have judging training from Big John McCarthy?
A little intimidating. He throws like punches and kicks in his training. I thought I was going to get a call with one of those.
Hey, you know what? He had to sit there and listen to me, so that was punishment enough.
It was almost a 10-8 round when if I got caught one of those with one of those punches or kicks that John throws. The best thing about John's and it wasn't a full seminar. I know that John does. John does training courses, and I would recommend anyone go to those in California. It was really only a crash course, but the way that John is able to kind of break it down to the common denominator and allow people to understand it really easily is really what makes him a good teacher. I think it was when he says things, he's very passionate about it. He knows what he's talking about. Of course, he comes from a great place of knowledge, and also he's good at breaking it down and making even us lowly journalists understand what he's talking about.
John, I don't know if you're aware of this, but Mike Beltran, outstanding referee who was also on that Bellator card at the CSAC Media Day, he came out laughing with a big smile on his face. I said, "What's up?" He said, "John's really giving it to those media guys in there." He said, "I had to get out of the room. I was laughing too hard."
Yeah, well, Mike came up to me and he was exactly the thing. Big smile on his face, laughing and saying, "They're getting a full-on John." He goes, because he's had to put up with it. He's had to sit there. I've taught with Mike, and he knows exactly. I am passionate about it because I love the sport. I love what we do. I love what the fighters do, and I want everyone to understand what's important. And we have a lot of fans out there that they watch the fights and they're in their mind judging it, and they're giving credit to things that you go, why are you giving credit to what's nothing? And that's the whole point, is we're trying to get people to understand what's important in the fight. What do you give credit to? And that was the main flux of what I was trying to do with the media while we were there for that short amount of time. Was these are the things we want you to look at. This is what I want you to see. And one of the hardest things to do is when you're watching a fight and you have two guys that are throwing, you've got to see which guy's actually landing, which guy's landing in a good spot, and which one is having an effect on his opponent. That's not an easy thing to do.
Marc, what do you think was your biggest misconception about MMA judging? And I'm sure you've mock scored thousands of rounds as an MMA writer. What was the biggest misconception or was there that moment where you thought, you know what, I was assessing this wrong, or I just didn't understand this criteria?
No, there definitely were. So much so that I've actually taken to going back to watching old fights on UFC Fight Pass and scoring them again after getting John's crash course on Friday. The biggest thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that quote unquote cage control and aggression really is a very secondary thing. The most important things around are effective striking and effective grappling, as John taught us. And only if those two things are absolutely equal do you then go down to things like aggression and cage control. So really that's what you're looking for. You're looking for effective striking, which is who's doing the most damage for the most part. And you're looking at effective grappling, who is trying to end the fight with submissions and that kind of thing. Also, you take someone down and you just sit in their guard for a minute. You don't get a whole lot of credit for that. And you also don't get a lot of credit for defending takedowns. You don't get points for defending takedowns. What defense gets you is staying in the fight, surviving the fight, getting back to where you want the fight to go. So you don't get credit for that, but that helps you in the fight, organically. So those are all things that I think a lot of people, when they watch MMA, don't quite understand. You always hear on the broadcast like, "Oh, cage control. Oh, he's
not from Jimmy Smith and the other broadcast." Marc, come on now.
Not you guys, not Bellator. But I think that there's misconceptions. Like you always hear people say, "Oh, he's being more aggressive. He's controlling the cage." That doesn't really mean a whole lot. And there's some choice words that I don't want to say on the podcast that John used. It doesn't mean the S word, but I think you guys get what I'm talking about. That effective striking, effective grappling are the primary things to look at when you're judging a round.
You can say whatever you want on this podcast. Randy Couture was up, and it was like a Comedy Central roast after midnight. You can say anything you want on this podcast.
The big thing that we want people to realize is, it's the same thing I was telling Marc on that day, is grappling and striking are elements of fighting. Cage control, if we have a guy that's dominating the center of the cage and the other guy's moving around to the outside, that's great, but there's no fighting involved with those actions. There's no fighting involved with the action of being aggressive and coming forward but not throwing anything. The thing that makes a fight is the striking and the grappling, and that's what we've got to get people to understand. That's what you score a fight off of. If Randy Couture puts somebody against the cage but doesn't do anything with it, ends up where he's getting the worst of the strikes. We'll say he's getting kneed, he's getting elbowed while he's holding someone against the cage. Congratulations, that cage control is great. It's getting your butt whipped against somebody that's using tools that are part of fighting, and that's the knees and the elbows.
Marc, John and I talk a lot about the misconception that if you've defended a submission successfully, somehow you should be rewarded for that. And as you found out from John, that John, as you say, congratulations, you just get to continue in the fight. There's no rewarding from a judge's perspective in assessing a round that you've properly defended. Was that something you were aware of, or was that also one of those eye-opening moments?
I think I was aware of that. That people who defend a submission don't get credit for that. Obviously, the person who's going for the submission is winning that particular battle. One of the things that really clicked in my mind was when John said, in the striking game, when you cut a really good angle in the striking game, you throw a punch, but you miss. You have great position. You're getting great position in the striking game, but you miss the punch. Do you get credit for that? No. So then why should you then get credit for getting a good position on the ground if you're not doing anything with it? So that kind of like really clicked in my head, like, what, that makes a lot of sense. If you're, why should you give credit to position on the ground if you're not giving giving credit to position on the feet without any damage being done or anything landing?
Marc, you hit on Go ahead, Sean.
The one part that we get into, and because a lot of people come from wrestling and jiu-jitsu, is in jiu-jitsu, you get to side control. I'm going to count out 3 seconds. I'm going to award you 3 points. You get to mount. I'm going to give you 4 points. And positionally, you get awarded for getting to these certain positions. But in MMA, you don't get that. The only thing the position does is it allows you to be able to inflict, good, effective blows and things on your opponent while they can't do it to you, and that can help you end the fight. So it's what you do with the position once you've attained it. It's not just attaining the position.
Marc, you hit on something with the broadcast, and I'll say as an MMA commentator, I think there's a responsibility on all of us, whether we're play-by-play or we're analysts, and by and large, I think my colleagues across World Series of Fighting, UFC, the fights on Access TV, I think outstanding. It wasn't always the case, and I think the people that were interlopers who didn't get it, I think they've really been thankfully run out of the business. But I think we have a responsibility, because if we say something as commentators, by and large, whether it's right or wrong, the fans believe it. That's why I try to be such an officiating nut. I've gone to seminars. I still work as a referee in boxing and Muay Thai in the state of Kansas. I think it's important on that. I will say, and it bothers me a lot, as great as the UFC broadcasts are, and I'm a big fan of watching World Series of Fighting too, they show that graphic. It's almost an identical graphic, the beginning of their broadcast. These are the judges' criteria. And I think we don't do it on Bellator, thankfully. And if we did, I would speak up so we wouldn't do it. But you're throwing these 4 criteria. It's like it's mix and match. And Marc, as you were saying, what John taught you last Friday, you go down the list. To me, it's almost like a tiebreaker. If 2 NFL teams are tied for the final wild card spot, you're not looking at total points scored. That's maybe the 4th tiebreaker. You're assessing all the way down. And I think that those graphics where you just throw them in and scramble them up, I think that adds to a lot of viewer and even media confusion, probably fighter confusion as well.
100%. I'll give you a slight example of that. I went back and I watched the first fight between Lyoto Machida and Shogun Rua back from UFC 109 this week after doing John's crash course on Friday. And I scored the fight 48-47 for Shogun, but at the time, everyone was talking about that fight as a robbery. Oh my God, because the judges gave it to Machida, and everyone was like, oh my God, this is a terrible decision. It was clearly for Shogun. I watched it again on Fight Pass without the sound on, without the commentators, and I scored it the way that John taught me, and I thought that Shogun won for sure, but it was extremely close. There was no robbery. I think that we need to take away that robbery word a lot in a lot of cases, because there is such thing as a close fight. If a close fight doesn't mean it's a robbery if it goes either way. But in the 5th round of that fight, I thought that Shogun had won the round to win the fight, but it was a very, very close round. And after the round was over, the only highlights the UFC showed on their pay-per-view that night were Shogun highlights. So they were almost painting it as if it was very clear that Shogun won. You could watch that round 10 times, or 10 people can watch that round, and 4 people might have it for Machida. It was a very, very, very close round. Yet the way the UFC was painting it, the way they were the way they were showing the highlights, made it seem like Shogun was the clear winner. So those are the kind of things that can influence a viewer and could lead someone to say like, oh, it was a robbery. But if you look at it without the sound, and if you kind of channel everything else and have tunnel vision on the fight, it wasn't a robbery at all.
Look at the work you've done, John.
Dude, it's awesome. I'm so proud.
Marc, final.
That's exactly
Marc,
it, and that's what we're looking at.
Marc, your final question for you.
Yeah.
When you go into your next event, as you're covering for MMAfighting.com, how are you going to approach it differently? I know as a commentator, and I was talking earlier about when I trained with the U.S. Soccer Federation officials, I started that season, I saw things so differently. How do you think it's going to be different for you now with your next big fight card that you're working?
Well, I'm already looking at things differently, which is why I went back and I wanted to look at old close fights. And I even started like a little bit of a thing on Twitter where people are like watching old fights with me, and we're like rescoring them based on how they really should be scored. How John teaches it. I would say that for one thing, when I watch fights this weekend, I will definitely be a little bit easier on the judges. I won't. There have been times. I mean, you guys know how it is. When a decision comes in, the media and the fans can be somewhat ruthless if they think the decision should go the other way. I have a newfound respect and a newfound appreciation for what judges do. So I will definitely treat things differently if there's a weird decision coming up this weekend. And I don't know if I'll ever watch fights the same way again. I think that I'll be looking for different things. I think that I'll be looking at it more, through a judge's eyes. But at the same time, I have to go back to my real job this week and actually write about all this stuff and tweet about it and all this other stuff. So I will not be able to accurately score these fights. But knowing that I won't be able to accurately score these fights, I won't be as domineering and saying that this judge is wrong, because I know that I'm doing other things. I can't sit and concentrate. And he or she probably saw more of the fight than I did. So I can't be too judgmental, as we'll say.
Marc, thanks for being on Let's Get It On. And, brother, full credit stepping up and being one of the brave 5 journalists. I know that some people turned down this opportunity that the California State Athletic Commission gave you guys. Full credit to you.
Thanks, guys. It was a great experience. I appreciate it, John. Sensei McCarthy.
I appreciate the time that you did that, and absolutely exactly what Sean is saying. You stepped forward and you put yourself in a position to actually, be criticized. And I applaud what you did, and I thank you. And from this point on, Marc's going to go out there and he's going to hear things from other media guys and stuff, and he can sit there and clear things up for people. And this is what we need. We need the right information going out there and people saying the right things about what should be looked at in the fight, because that's what helps everyone grow and learn and understand why things are the way they are.
Marc Raimondi of MMAfighting.com joining us on Let's Get It On. John, final point on this is Marc departs the program. He alluded to this, and I've had this experience because I've worried about conflict of interest. I'll referee pro boxing, pro Muay Thai. Even though I'm certified through the state of Kansas and I've been to ABC courses, just conflict of interest. I've been a little wary of reffing and judging MMA. But I've shadow judged in Kansas. I shadow judged Invicta 1. What I thought was, what an incredible amount of concentration. Believe me, I'm concentrating when I'm commentating a fight, but it's a different level of concentration, and I'm looking at other things, and my producer's in my ear, and I'm listening to what Jimmy Smith is saying, and I'm taking cues. The concentration for 5 minutes is just remarkable, because you can't think, wow, I wonder if my wife's going to call, or where again did I park, or what time do I have to get my kid tonight, or did I leave the oven on? Not that I would ever cook, but you know what I'm saying. You cannot break concentration for 5 minutes.
No, and it's incredibly difficult, and this is what people don't realize is when they're watching fights, many times they're getting excited. They probably want one fighter over another. They start to like one, even if they don't go into the fight that way. They start to, side with one fighter over the other, and they start to actually give just a little bit more credit to what that fighter does. And the thing that we are trying to get people to understand is to be a judge and to sit there and to concentrate. And it's not only for 5 minutes. You're concentrating for 5 minutes, possibly 5 times for a fight. If it's Will Brooks versus Dave Jansen, you're concentrating. Those are 5-minute rounds, and you're also doing up to 14 other fights. The one thing that we got out of all the reporters at the end of the day, they go, "Oh my God, that's exhausting."
Yeah, there were 13 fights on that Bellator card.
And you have to sit through all of them, and you're concentrating. You're giving the same. It doesn't matter if it's the world title fight or if it's the first fight of the night. You're giving that same level of concentration and respect to those fighters to judge their fight the correct way, so that the right fighter gets credit for what they're doing, and we have the right decision at the end of the fight. And so it's not an easy thing to do. It's very difficult. People look at it and think that, oh, I do it at home all the time. It's completely different. When you have to actually put your name down on that judging slip, and that slip goes to the scoring table, and it has credit, it has power. There's a lot of responsibility with that, and it's not the same when you just sit there at home.
Every week on Let's Get It On, we bring you our poll question. You can cast your vote on our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. This week's poll question: do you feel that Athletic Commission should offer training and shadow judging opportunities to the media, as the California State Athletic Commission did last Friday for Bellator 136? Cast your vote, letsgetitonpodcast.com. I guess the alternative is let the media go out and do it themselves. This isn't the responsibility of the Athletic Commission. I know how we're voting on this, though, John.
Yeah, it is the responsibility of the Athletic Commission. It's the responsibility of the Athletic Commission to be as transparent as possible to anything that is questioned in our sports, because we want people to know exactly why we're doing things a certain way. And if, there's a better way to do it, then we need to find the better way to do it. But there's nothing to hide. There's nothing secretive about this. It's amazing to me how people look at athletic commissions, and you're going to get all kinds of different things, and you'll get officials that they'll be upset because they don't work enough. They feel that other people are getting more fights or more assignments, and they get all upset. And it's really, when you look at, if you have a business and you're going to run that business to the best of your ability and you want your business to be successful, what do? Well, you hire people. Who do you hire? Do you hire just the person that says, I just want to work? Or do you hire the very best person you can? And that's what, athletic commissions, when they have, officials, all officials are not the same. They're of different levels, and, you can put them into, categories of, you got A-level officials, B-level, C-level, or, whatever. But we need to always put the very best people we can put in those positions to be a referee or the judge, because that's what the fighters deserve. It's what the fans deserve. Because when we have a lesser official to come in and makes a mistake that costs the fighter a fight or costs the fans the ability to see, the right person win, it affects the sport in a bad way. Our job is to be as good as we can be every time. And we need to be as open with what we do to the public so they can all see that, there's nothing hidden here. It's not, there's nothing out there that we're trying to cover up for you. We're just trying to get the best people to do the best job every time.
Big John and I always want to hear from you on Let's Get It On. Ask your questions. You can email us directly, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. And as I say every week, and John, it's getting through, please include instructions on how to correctly pronounce your name. That's exactly what Scott Pfeiffer did. Well done to you, Scott, and I like this question. So Scott asks, John, when a fight is ready to start and you ask each fighter if they are ready, has anyone ever said no? If they did say no, what would you do?
I had one time a guy jokingly said no. And I go, excuse me, right? And he goes, I'm kidding, right? And we started up. But, the whole thing is this. You can get into situations, and I've seen referees have someone sit there and say, no, I don't want to go. And they say, well, you have to. And they start the fight. And you can't just do that either. If the person doesn't want to fight, we can't make somebody fight. And so we've got to make sure that when the person comes in there, they're ready to go. You can go all the way back into, go to UFC 3. Royce Gracie's going to fight Harold Howard, and he comes into the cage, and I can see he's not the Royce that I know. And he's messed up, and I bring his brother up and say that he can't fight. And the announcements are going on for the names and stuff. And by the time that all that goes on, Rorion Gracie says, yeah, he can't fight. We'll bring another fighter in. And I go, no, you can't do that. He has been announced. Throw the towel. He's done. And so they threw the towel in, giving Harold Howard the win. Royce got a loss off of it. And people say, well, that's not fair. Yes, it is. If you can't fight, you come into the cage. And at that point, after you've been in the cage, you decide it's a forfeit. No problem. The fight's over. But we can't sit there and just bring somebody else in at that time. It's a little bit different now, but I've had guys go jokingly, but quickly said, I'm just kidding, and we start the fight.
Next question, at JoeDaddy85. And by the way, Twitter names and screen names are, of course, welcome. So at JoeDaddy85 asks John, why don't we see judges / officials / referees interviewed, especially after controversial decisions? You answer, and then I'm going to throw in an answer on this as well.
Well, first off, the truth, athletic commissions don't want their officials talking. It's frowned upon, and it's frowned upon because the athletic commission is really doing it for the benefit of the official, because the officials sometimes can say things that get them into a place that they're going to have a hard time getting themselves out of. They can dig themselves a hole very fast, and they do that off of emotion and pressure. Things can build quickly, and they can crush you quickly. And so you have to be able to know exactly, what to say at a given time. And when you have a Joe Rogan or a Jimmy Smith come in and shove a microphone in your face, and you've got all these fans in the arena, they're booing and stuff, it's not the right time for someone to talk. But I personally believe that officials should be able to come out and say, well, this is why I did it, and this is what I saw, and this is the road that I took. The biggest thing is the official has got to be honest. Our whole job is to be as fair as we can be to the fighters. And I tell everyone every time, you need to be as honest as you can be. Your integrity is everything. If you make a mistake, then own up to the mistake. Said, I made a mistake. Here was my mistake. This is what I did. And this is why I made the mistake. And this is what I'm going to do so this mistake never happens again. And we have to move on. But, there are fans out there that won't even accept that. They won't accept an official saying, I made a mistake. They're going to say, well, you made a mistake. You're out. You should be gone. Well, human beings make mistakes. You show me the human that doesn't make a mistake right now, and I'm going to show you someone that's getting to be a deity. All right? We just don't have that. Everyone's going to make a mistake, and the biggest thing is we need to be able to, admit to our mistake and then move on.
We've done it twice, and both in the early days of Bellator. We did it in 2010 in Illinois and in early 2011 in California. We decided afterwards not to do it because it's an uncomfortable situation. From my perspective, John, having been an official as a commentator, I've never really thought of myself as media. I'm kind of in that hybrid as a commentator, but I see what the media does. I'm around media. And then also from being a referee, I always did low-level boxing and Muay Thai. I still do, never on TV. But in those situations, if the in-ring, in-cage interviewer live on a broadcast, regardless if it's Jimmy Smith or Joe Rogan or a webcast, it doesn't matter, they're getting you at a moment where you probably are filled with adrenaline. You're maybe in a vulnerable situation as an official. It's probably not going to go as well as if you waited a couple of hours and then you spoke when it's more considered. And probably the bigger picture on this, John, I know you'll agree, you got to check with your athletic commission, because our buddy Mike Mazzulli, who runs Mohegan Sun, as good a commissioner as there is in the history of combat sports, he would really frown on that. In another state, maybe a more loosely regulated state or one with a newer commission, they really might not care. They might not have an opinion. They might say, go ahead. It's very much a case-by-case situation.
It is, and people have to understand there's reasons why, Mike Mazzulli sits there and goes, I don't want my officials talking to the media. There's good reasons behind it. And he would rather take the time to let's figure out what occurred, why it happened. All right, now that I have all the information, I can come back and say, well, this is what we're going to do about it. And there's not a whole lot of emotion with that. There's only good logic. And that makes sense, to put an official out there while they are in that pressure situation. And trust me, there's no official that wants to go out there and screw up. No one wants to be in that position. And to have someone right away come after them, they're usually not going to say the right thing. So that's why someone like Mike Mazzulli says, hey, I don't allow my officials to talk. It's not even a choice. He's not going to talk to you, because that if you talk as the official, if I go and I talk to the media, I know Mike Mazzulli is never going to use me again. Okay, so that's a choice that I have. I can go talk to him, or I can decide, no, I'm not, and I can go back and work again on another day, because he's going to look at what I did, see if there's a way that we can fix it, and then move on from it.
Remember, keep your questions coming. Always excellent. We have a backlog. We will do our best to get to all of them. info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Again, email us your questions. Absolutely anything you'd like to ask John. info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Still to come on this week's episode of Let's Get It On, Big John and I will discuss an almost surreal interaction between a fighter and a referee, complete with the amazing audio of their in-fight conversation, and we'll pay tribute to a true one-of-a-kind, Kevin Rozier, winner of the second fight in UFC history, who sadly passed away on Tuesday but left a legacy of goodwill and great stories. With Big John McCarthy, I'm Sean Wheelock. You are listening to Let's Get It On. It's the book that Wrestling Observer calls a must-read for any MMA fan. Jonathan Snowden of Bleacher Report describes as riveting and amazing, and TheFightNerd.com says nothing is held back. Pick this book up right away. Is This Legal? The inside story of the first UFC from the man who created it, written by UFC founder Art Davie and me, Sean Wheelock, with the foreword by John McCarthy, is now available to listeners of this podcast at the special price of $12.48. That's far less than you'll pay for the book on Amazon and half price of what you'll pay in store at Barnes & Noble. Buy it directly from the publisher now online at ascendbooks.com and enter the promo code LEGAL50. That's ASCEND books.com, promo code LEGAL50. Learn the true story of how the UFC came into existence in the book that Randy Couture describes as honest, shocking, and enthralling, and that has a rating of 4.9 out of 5 stars from Amazon Reader Reviews. Is This Legal? The inside story of the first UFC from the man who created it, by UFC founder Art Davie and me, Sean Wheelock, with the foreword by Big John McCarthy. Available now online at ascendbooks.com for just $12.48 when you use the promo code LEGAL50.
For all of our listeners looking for great new designs in MMA apparel, look to the new clothing styles of Lambs to Lions. That's right, Lambs to Lions has got new styles with old and new put together. Boxing, MMA, everything. Go to lambstolionsbrand.com and check out their line of clothing.
Now, back to Let's Get It On with your hosts, Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock.
On Tuesday, Kevin Rozier passed away at age 53. Rozier was a professional kickboxer and boxer who is best known for his participation in the first UFC, November 12, 1993, in which he defeated Zane Fraser in the opening round of the tournament before losing to Gerard Gordeau in the semifinals. When I was writing Is This Legal with Art Davie, I was utterly fascinated by every single one of Art's Kevin Rozier stories, all of which made the book. To give you a sense of Kevin Rozier, I'm now going to read a short section from Is This Legal? And for context, this passage takes place at the celebration back at the hotel in downtown Denver, which followed the fights and is written in Art Davie's first person. Rozier was the first fighter to arrive at the party, and he was wearing a circa 1975-looking tux, complete with a huge flower cummerbund. He looked as joyous as if he had won the tournament and greeted me with a huge hug. He then proclaimed that he was my long-lost son and that he was now going to call me Dad. Rozier then excused himself and said that he wanted to go look for John McCarthy so that he could challenge him to a pizza eating contest. John, I think right there, that's Kevin Rozier. So happy, just thrilled to be a part of it. Move past the fact that he was annihilated by Gerard Gordeau. Art Davie said, and it's in the book, after he beats Zane Fraser, really, Rozier would have been happy just to grab a beer and watch the rest of the fights. And all he wants to do is challenge you to a pizza eating contest at the after party.
Kevin Rozier was he was a gentle giant. He was just a super nice, funny guy. You know, and the first time I met him was there in Denver. I actually drove. He and his manager was Charlie Anzalone, who's an inspector now in the state of Nevada, has been for the last 15 years. And I drove them to the actual arena, you know, for the fights and stuff. And he was funny, you know, the whole time and stuff. And he was just kept saying, "Can you believe we're going to do this? Can you believe we're going to do this?" So it gets to the point where, you know, he was asking me about how much pizza can you eat? You're a big guy. How much pizza? I said, "Pizza can I eat? What are you talking about?" Right? He goes, "I can eat 4 extra large pizzas. Can you do that?" And I go, "No, I can't do that." And he goes, "All right, we need to have a pizza eating contest." And that's where that came from. But Kevin was just a sweetheart of a guy, you know, and he fought at, you know, UFC 1 and he fought at UFC 4. And it's funny because at UFC 4, he fought as an alternate against Joe Charles. And before the day of the fights, I was working out with him, trying to teach him how to do armbar defense and choke defense, because he had really not a lot of, you know, knowledge on the ground. He knew that Joe Charles knew, you know, from judo, knew these things. And so I started working with him armbar defense, and he quickly says, "I got that. He says, "Let's go to chokes," right? And I go, "No, I don't think you've got it yet," right? And he goes, "No, I've got that. Let's go to the chokes." And so we go and we worked on chokes, and I rolled with him for probably an hour. And then he got caught in an armbar in like 14 seconds, so I didn't help him at all. But it's unfortunate. You know what's going to happen, you know, somewhere along the way. But at 53 years of age is way too early to have someone like Kevin pass.
I never had a chance to meet Kevin Rozier, and my view of him is shaped not just in watching those early UFCs, all of which I still have on VHS, which I illegally recorded, but come and get me now. Hey, it helped me write a book anyway, right? But also through the eyes of Art Davie. Art Davie thought so much of Kevin Rozier. He said they exchanged Christmas cards years and years after Kevin Rozier was done fighting. And the story, too, and we put it in the book, as you well know, John, Rozier had sold himself as a world champion in American kickboxing, big right hand, said he was 265 pounds. When Art picks him up at the airport in Denver, he thinks that Rozier's about 325. Art says, "What happened to 265? I said, well, I put on a little bit of weight. If you have not seen the fight, it's on Daily Motion. It might be on YouTube as well, certainly MMA-core.com. The Kevin Rozier versus Zane Fraser fight. First card, second fight in UFC history. It is so incredibly brutal. Rozier walks through straight groin shots from Zane Fraser, who argued for them in the fighters meeting. We put that in the book too. Finishes with head stomps. I mean, the sheer brutality of that fight and the toughness of Kevin Rozier, it's just off the charts.
You know, really, if you look at it, Zane Fraser put an ass whipping on him for the first, let's say minute and a half of that fight. And Zane actually had asthma, and the altitude didn't help him. And he started to have an asthma attack and just started to fold. But it was Kevin being able to take all that punishment, and then he started coming back, and Zane just, gassed himself. And Rozier was so tired, he's holding onto the fence, just taking a foot and stomping on Zane when the towel came in. But, the whole point, if you look at it, is he went in and did something at a time when most people would never have done it, because they would have been scared to death. And I'm sure Kevin, had some fear going in, not really knowing what was going to occur, but he had so much respect for Gerard Gordeau. I can tell you that, because we talked about him that night. He knew who Gerard was and had so much respect for Gerard Gordeau that I think that when he got into that second fight with Gerard, it was almost like he was fighting one of his idols. And he was just overwhelmed just with the thought of going against Gerard. But you look at, what he did. He stepped in that void when people had no idea what was really going to happen. And he stepped into that dark void and did it. And you got to give the man credit. He had a huge heart. He was a great character. He could eat a lot of pizza, I guess. I never got into that championship competition with him. But, again, it's the first passing of the, one of the 10 that were, as Art would say, one of the X-15, pilots, guys trying to break that sound barrier. And, that's something that, will live on in infamy with Kevin Rozier's name.
John, my final thought on Kevin Rozier, he's the type of guy that we saw early in MMA. We just don't see the Kevin Roziers of the world in mixed martial arts anymore. There was that period when the sport began, November 12th, 1993, through maybe the mid to late 90s, but it's just that type of character. They're just not in MMA. In MMA, we have characters. We just don't have the Kevin Rozier type characters now.
Yeah, well, it's a different world, and you can go back, and I could pick up names, and even guys that became really famous and well known and were really good fighters. They were characters. Don Fry is as much of a character as you'll find, but he could fight. He was tougher than hell. But you had the Harry Moskowitzes, and and he would go in there with tattooed on a shirt he's wearing, or all the guys, the Bowdens that went in and fought and, had no idea really what was going on. It was a different world there. It wasn't really so much about what we see now, as we just get pure athletes, especially at the top levels. Guys that are fighting are so good at all these different elements, and they're such good athletes. It's what separates our sport now. And before we had martial artists, and we didn't have sometimes really great athletes, but we did have some characters that were out there, and Kevin was definitely one of those characters.
That's really nicely said, John. Well, finally this week on Let's Get It On, we want to tell you about a bizarre interaction between a fighter and a referee that you likely missed. The fight in which this occurred took place on the undercard of last Friday's Bellator, and it aired on Spike.com rather than a part of our main card on the Spike broadcast, which is why this is kind of flown under the radar. Chad George versus Mark Vorgis with Mylan Ayers the referee. This is how Jimmy Smith and I called it.
Vorgis just tenaciously holding on to a guillotine position
even though George is in side control.
Yeah, but he could be trapping that hand with his left arm. I can't see from this position here if he can pull the right arm out at all.
Now George has his head free. No, he's not. No, he's not. No, he's not.
He's out.
Borges got caught on the Von Flue choke.
I have never seen that before in my life. They were literally arguing about whether or not he was out. He was completely out.
George said to Ayers, he's out. Ayers said, no, he's not. George says, yes, he is. Ayers looked at the face of Marc Borges. Technical submission on the Von Flue choke, just like that.
John, you were cage side. Mylon Ayers, very good referee, was in the cage. That's a tough position to be in. It was just a weird sequence.
You know, it's understandable if you know what happened and the type of choke. And what really was happening is Chad had that choke on from the half guard for a while, and then he finally got his leg free and gets it from the side control. And that Von Flue choke, from when you have complete side control, it's a great choke. And it's one that I with fighters all the time, I go, why did you not go to a Von Flue choke when you're in this position? And they're going, a what? A lot of them don't understand it. Chad George uses it all the time. And what occurs is, if you watch it, and everything depends upon the angle of the referee and what he's looking at, because he's looking at a lot of different things at the time. But when he sees that choke, I can guarantee you Mylon Ayers knows that choke. And I can tell you that because, you know, Mylon went through my course. I taught Mylon, and one of the things that he's got to know is that Von Flue choke. And we go over it and we talk about it because it can catch officials in a bad spot, because they can look at things in the wrong way, thinking, oh, the one guy's head is inside. They need to understand who's in trouble in this choke. But what happened is, you can see Borges, he goes out. His left hand starts to go limp. And as soon as he goes out, Chad George is letting go of it. And Mylon Ayers is looking, and Mylon did not see him get to that point of going unconscious. And as soon as Chad gets off him, the pressure is released. Well, we get a reaction. Instead of him staying out and being out flat onto the canvas, the pressure release actually gives just a little bit to where his body starts to react, and he's able to almost control himself and bring himself up in where he's holding his body, but the brain still isn't working. And that's what Mylon is looking at, saying, no, he's not out, because his body's working. But then he's looking at his eyes, and he finally says, okay, fight's over, because he sees that the brain is just not functioning the way it needs to function. And that what you really need to give credit to here is Chad George. Chad goes, and he is a professional athlete, professional fighter. He understands what our sport's about. He acts in a professional manner. You're going to get a lot of guys that would sit there and they'd come up, and the referee would say, no, he's good. And they would start leveling shots at a fighter that cannot protect himself. And he can do serious damage to his opponent there. And Chad was an absolute professional. He's sitting there, and we tell referees all the time, we can't listen to fighters. When a fighter says someone's out, you can't listen to that, because I'm guaranteeing you 90% of the time they're wrong. You know, 10% of the time they'll be right. But we can't listen to that. You've got to go off of what you see, not what the fighter's telling you. And so when Chad comes up and he's saying he's out, Mylon is looking, going, no, he's not. And Chad doesn't do anything in an offensive fashion to his opponent. And you got to give credit to Chad for being the professional that he was.
We're going to play this for you again, this time now without the commentary of Jimmy Smith and me. The voices that you'll hear, or that of... So you're just going to hear fighter Chad George and referee Mylon Ayers.
No, he's not. No, he's not. No, he's not.
He's out.
John, that's amazing sportsmanship, like you said.
Yeah, and you're going to hear that conversation a lot. And I can tell you, I say it probably every 10th show. I'll get someone saying he's out, and I'll go, no, he's not. Just keep fighting, and he's not. And the fighter, you know, sometimes the fighter's going to try to do it to try to, you know, get himself, you know, through a situation. Sometimes he's doing it thinking his opponent is, when he just can't see what we can see. But that whole point of what we're talking about with Chad, and that, you know, he's sitting there and he's not opening up on his opponent. That's what, you know, a professional is about. That's what a guy who cares about his, you know, opponent. He wants to go out there and he wants to win, and he's doing everything he can to win. And he did what he was supposed to do to win the fight. And he doesn't put any other any other type of, action towards his opponent. And, our job as a referee, when we talk about it, we tell guys all the time, you cannot keep people from being hurt in the sport of MMA. That's not your job. Fighters are going to get hurt. But what we want to make sure you do is you protect them from unnecessary harm. And this is the situation where that unnecessary harm can come into effect, because if Chad starts to open up and he does hit Borges with shots, now we're allowing that fighter to be hurt with unnecessary harm. And that's what Chad, in his own mind, decided I'm not going to do. And he helped Mylan Ayers in protecting the fighter by not going after him.
John, when you're instructing, if you would use this as a teaching tool, what's the takeaway here? I mean, one of the big takeaways, this does not happen very often. You heard Jimmy Smith. He and I have been calling fights together since the start of 2008. He was a 6-1 pro MMA fighter, and he said on our broadcast, I've never seen that before.
Yeah. And, this is what happens. And this is, all the time, everything is evolving and we're learning. And there's certain things that can happen in one fight that all of a sudden we said that can't happen, and all of a sudden it does. And we learn from it. And that's every referee out there is learning from what Mylan Ayers had to go through in that one situation. And you never know who's the guy that's going to be inside that cage as the referee going through the problem himself. But this is why we tell people, be careful of trying to get into things before you're ready, because this is what can happen. And when it's you and it is on TV and everyone sees it, then everyone's going to start attacking you. It's good to have these things happen when there's not a whole lot of attention on that fight. But we can all learn from what Mylan Ayers went through. We learned that, we have to be able to check and see exactly and understand when does the fighter go out. And there's, I'm telling you, after watching it, you can see when Borges goes out. You can see it. And the fight should have been called. But it was right exactly when he goes out that Chad releases the hold and comes up and says he's out, which was amazing to me that Chad did it that fast. It was very close to almost the same situation, that different type of hold. But when Josh Burnett ends up fighting John Fitch, you watch what occurred in that. And as soon as Fitch went out, Josh got up quickly. And sometimes you'll have fighters do that, and sometimes you'll have them just sit there and hold on to it because they're waiting for the referee to tell them stop. But in this situation, we can all learn from it. And, this is part of our sport. Everything is going to come out eventually, but it's going to be years down the road because things are just happening all the time that we all need to learn from.
John, the striking version of this, and it happens all the time, this is a common occurrence. Guys landing shots unanswered. He's done. Stop the fight. You get that how often? All the time.
Yep. All the time. And you get, our job is to protect people when they can't protect themselves. And you're going to get, I can tell you, I just did a fight with, Herb Dean being the referee, and Chuck Liddell is, he's there watching the fight. And there's a finish in the fight, and Herb stops the fight. And Chuck comes over to me and he says, I don't think he should have stopped it there. And I go, why? And he goes, because he says he was taking damage here. He goes, but right when Herb stopped it, that was when he was starting to do something to get out of the position. And I go, he was mounted and all he did was turn. He wasn't trying to push the knee or anything like that. He goes, yeah, but he's got to get to his side to get out. And I go, Chuck, you're looking at things like a fighter. I said, and I totally appreciate that because you're trying to give that fighter every chance. I said, we don't look at this from this perspective of the fighter. We look at, is the person doing something that is actually a technique to get themselves out of the problem? I said, and when Herb sees that he's not doing anything that's actually going to get him out of the problem, all he's doing is turning to get away from the punching. I said, that's why he stopped the fight, and that's why it's the right call. And, we're all going to have these things. This is always moving on in a direction that we're all learning, and we're hopefully getting everyone to look at things the same way.
Do you like fighters talking to you, especially at the higher levels? You would know who the talkers are, or is it a distraction? Do you see it as white noise? I mean, this is a situation, like you said, where it's in that absolute minority where the fighter is actually showing sportsmanship, saying the end of the fight, rather than trying to buy the referee to make a decision in his favor.
That's exactly it. And, and I can tell you, I've been caught in situations where I've had fighters do things that they're trying to cheat. Okay. And, I always say, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. So it's not that I'm mad at them for it, but I'm mad if I get myself caught up in it. And I've had that happen, and I've made huge mistakes. The one that I look at all the time, Matt Lindland versus Murilo Bustamante, kills me. I let Matt suck me in, and I believed I saw something, and then I had him tell me, no, I was wrong, and I didn't stick with what I saw. And this is part of, the growing of you as an official, is you've got to look at those things, and you've got to be able to say, okay, I made a mistake, and here's how I'm going to fix this mistake. And one of the things that we'll tell officials all the time is you have got to go off of what you know. If you make a decision, go with it, but you cannot be led by what a fighter says. You can look at Yves Levine had a famous fight with Mac Danzig against Matt Wyman up from Vancouver, British Columbia. And, Matt Wyman puts Mac in a couple of dangerous situations, but you can see that Mac is doing the right thing to keep the pressure off of just one side of his neck. And it gets to a point where Matt Wyman tells Yves he's out. Yves does this arm tug, which is something that we don't, I don't instruct people to do because there's reasons it's not going to work for you. And Yves thinks that Matt is right, that Mac's out, and is, he pulls him off, and Mac is, I'm fine. And he was fine. And you could see he was fine. But not that he wasn't in danger. He was in danger. But the fight was stopped prematurely based upon our referee listening to a fighter. And Yves didn't just listen to the fighter. He tried to get some feedback in a different way that told him he was out. It was just the mistake of he needed to look at the way the bodies were, and what Mac Danzig's body was doing is telling you he's still there.
And John, the last point on this, that's the flip side from Milanaires. Let's say that Chad George is trying to buy this, which he clearly wasn't, but let's just say that he was, or Fighter X for that matter, not to indict Chad George. Can you imagine the reaction of Marc Raimondis if he hasn't been choked unconscious with the Von Flu and he pops up? Now what do you do? Yeah. It's a horrible situation, and it's a no contest.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. And, this is Drew Dober. You're looking at the Drew Dober, Leandro Silva fight. This is what happened in the UFC in Brazil, is we had, the referee looking at something in a way that, nope, that position, he's not the guy in trouble. And, you need to understand officials need to make it right. And that's why they're working so hard to get all the information they can to make the right choice, because that situation with Chad could have been the exact same thing as the Drew Dober if he's listening to somebody and that person's not right.
John, the takeaway from this week's episode of Let's Get It On, we heard it from Marc. Judging, refereeing, everything in MMA and combat sports, it's not easy, is it?
Come on. Anyone can do it, man. It's so easy. Just get out there and do it.
Anybody can do it. It's so simple. Come on. Who trained these guys? Let's go now.
The best part is, and this is what I love about you, Sean, is, you're part of it. You're part of it as, everyone looks at your job. And they go, I could do that, man. I could talk about fights. And they have no idea what it takes to do your job. They have no idea what it's like to sit there and just talk in a nice, calm fashion while people are talking into your earpiece, and you got people in front of you giving you signs. And there's so much going on. It's so difficult to do. But the average person just looks at it and goes, all I have to do is talk. And they think that, as in a fight, all I got to do is move around. And when someone's hurt, I stop it. There's a whole lot more to doing, things in the right way than people realize.
John, I appreciate the kind words. That's very nice of you. And I've come to the conclusion in life, everybody's job is hard, and nobody really has any idea what somebody really does in their job. No matter what you do for a living, it's tough, and nobody really has a clue unless they do it themselves.
That's it. Unless you've walked in those shoes, you have no idea what it's like. And you have no idea the intricacies of what it does, what it takes to do that job the right way. Because, again, I tell people all the time, you want to be an MMA referee, you could have a fight, which is a great fight, where you don't have to do anything. The fighters are doing everything the right way. There's no fouls going on. They're just, going after each other. There's all these position changes, and it goes all the way to the end of the fight where the judges are the ones that are going to make a decision on the fight. And anybody could have been standing in that ring, walking around, because there was no real decisions to be made during that fight. Now, we know that after the fight is over. And, again, anyone could have done it. Or that fight could have been one of the most difficult fights where there's all of these decisions to make and there's all of these problems to handle. And that's when it takes the guy that really knows what he's doing.
We are back with you next week for a new episode of Let's Get It On. First available on Friday. Download and subscribe to our podcast on the iTunes Store. For Android, download the Stitcher app and subscribe. And you can go straight to our website. You can stream it. You can subscribe. Let'sGetItOnPodcast.com. You can also find us on social media, Facebook.com/Let'sGetItOnPodcast, and on Twitter @PodcastMMA for this show and for us personally, @John McCarthy MMA and @Sean Wheelock. To ask us a question, make a comment, or inquire about becoming a sponsor of Let's Get It On, email us at info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. And that's info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. And please help us spread the word. This podcast is as much yours as it is ours. For John McCarthy, Marc Raimondi, and our producer Chris Lakin, I'm Sean Wheelock. Thanks for listening, everyone. This has been a presentation of Ignotainment Media Network, online at ignotainment.com.
Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock, only on the Ignotainment Media Network. Don't forget to leave a rating and review in the comments section of the iTunes Podcast Store. If you have questions, comments, or are interested in sponsoring the show, contact us at info@letsgetitonpodcast.com, or check out our additional lineup of podcasts, including Ocho Man, Behind the Eight Ball, The Whiskey Philosopher, and Youth Baseball Talk at ignotainment.com.